Today, we're diving into the story of an ancient superpower, an empire so powerful, so formidable, that it literally stopped the world's greatest conqueror dead in his tracks. This is the story of the incredible rise of Magadha. So let's kick things off with a huge historical mystery. We all know the name Alexander the Great, right? The undefeated king who built a massive empire stretching all the way from Greece to Persia. But in 326 BCE, right on the edge of India, his legendary campaign just stopped. His soldiers, these men who had conquered the known world, suddenly refused to go one step further. So the question is, why? To get that answer, we really need to understand the world Alexander was about to walk into. You see, it wasn't one single, unified kingdom. It was a complex and, honestly, a pretty chaotic landscape of competing states. If we rewind a couple hundred years before Alexander even showed up, this is what the political map looked like. The whole region was dominated by these 16 powerful kingdoms, which were known as the Mahajanapadas. Seriously, you can just picture it as this giant chessboard, with all these ambitious rulers constantly fighting for control. Now, the basic building block for all of this was something called the Janapada, and the word itself is kind of beautiful. It literally translates to the place where the people place their feet. So these weren't just random lines on a map. They were real territories defined by communities and villages that eventually grew into the first true states of the region. And here's something you might not expect. These states weren't all the same. Sure, a lot of them were your classic monarchies, ruled by hereditary kings. But some were actually democratic republics, like the Shakyas and the Lichavis, where leaders were actually elected. It just goes to show you how politically diverse and dynamic this part of the world was. Okay, so how do you get from this fragmented land of warlords to a single, dominant superpower? Well, the answer is a perfect storm of new technology and a relentless cycle of conflict that changed absolutely everything. The whole process really kicked off with a simple technological leap: iron. With iron tools, people could finally clear the dense jungles, opening up huge new areas for farming. And more farming meant more food, which created a surplus. That surplus fueled prosperity and a population boom. Settlements grew into those Janapadas we just talked about, and with more resources and more people, well, these states started to fight each other. It was a classic case of survival of the fittest. The strong absorbed the weak until only a few great powers, the Mahajanapadas, were left standing. After decades and decades of this struggle, those 16 Mahajanapadas were basically whittled down to just 4 main contenders for the top spot. You had Vatsa, Avanti, Kosala, and of course the one that would eventually rise above them all, Magadha. So, how did Magadha win this ultimate contest of kingdoms? Let me tell you, it was no accident. This empire was forged by a series of incredibly ambitious and, let's be honest, often ruthless rulers. The first great architect of Magadha's power was King Bimbisara. This guy was a master strategist. He had this two-pronged approach. He expanded his territory through smart marriages to form alliances, but also through direct military conquest. His most critical victory by far was capturing the kingdom of Anga. Why? Because this gave Magadha control over 2 absolutely vital resources: rich iron ore deposits to arm its soldiers, and key river trade routes to fund its expansion. And the momentum just kept building. Bimbisara's son, Ajatashatru, was even more aggressive. He spent his entire 32-year reign just conquering his neighbors, turning Magadha into the wealthiest kingdom in all of northern India. And then, that strong foundation was built upon by a new dynasty, the Nandas. They seized power and took Magadha from being just a regional power to a true, mighty empire. Now, this is the crucial point. By the time Alexander the Great was even on the horizon, the Nanda Empire of Magadha was way more than just another kingdom. It was a military juggernaut. We actually have Greek historians who wrote about its power, describing an army of absolutely immense size. This was the force that was waiting for Alexander just across the river. And now, the two stories finally converge. It's 326 BCE. Fresh off conquering the massive Persian Empire, Alexander the Great marches his army into India. He entered a part of India that was, much like the rest of the subcontinent had been, politically fragmented. The kings in the northwest were always at war with each other, and, this division made them vulnerable. Some of the rulers, like Ambi of Taxila, basically saw the writing on the wall and just submitted to Alexander without even putting up a fight. But not everyone gave in that easily. Alexander soon met his toughest challenge yet: in King Porus. Porus and his army, which featured hundreds of war elephants, fought with unbelievable bravery. It was a brutal, hard-won battle, but in the end, Alexander's tactical genius won the day, and Porus was defeated and captured. What happened next became the stuff of legend. When Alexander asked the captured Porus how he wanted to be treated, Porus famously replied, "As one king should treat another king." Alexander was so blown away by his courage and his dignity that he didn't just set Porus free. He returned his entire kingdom to him. They even say the two became friends. But after that incredible battle with Porus, Alexander's army pushed on, deeper and deeper into India, until they reached the banks of the river Bias. And this, right here, was the moment of truth, because beyond that river lay the heartland of the massive Magadha Empire. And here, finally, is our answer. After years of nonstop marching and fighting thousands of miles from home, Alexander's soldiers were just done. They were exhausted, they were homesick, but more than anything, they had heard these terrifying reports about the army waiting for them across the river, the colossal force of Magadha. The thought of facing this fresh, powerful, and enormous army was the final straw. They simply refused to go on. But here's the thing. Even though Alexander turned back, his brief invasion left a permanent mark on history. He opened up 4 new trade routes, creating a direct link for goods and ideas between India and Europe. The super detailed records kept by the Greeks who came with him became a crucial source for historians, helping them piece together the timeline of ancient India. And maybe coolest of all, the cultural contact sparked this beautiful fusion of artistic styles that we now call the Gandhara School of Art. So, in the end, we're left with one of history's greatest what-ifs. What do you think would have happened if Alexander's battle-hardened but weary veterans had actually clashed with the full, fresh might of the Magadha Empire? It is the epic battle that never was, leaving us all to wonder how differently history might have turned out.